Hello, this is Anthony Gorhan again in the fourth and final installment of this series of discussions of grammar and the various elements of English grammar and particularly of the verb phrase in English. In previous installments we've talked about the nature of grammar in general, the phrase structure of English, and the four basic components of the verb phrase in English: tense, aspect, mood, and now finally voice. There are two voices in English, active voice and passive voice, and the terms active and passive are seriously misleading, and you can see this if you simply look at recent news stories. For example, a couple of years ago, Barack Obama, the US president, was accused of being less dominant and authoritative as a leader than his predecessor, George W. Bush, based on a linguistic study that claimed to show that Barack Obama employed passive voice more frequently in his public addresses than George W. Bush did. Now, this is interesting for two reasons. First of all, it's factually inaccurate, because a proper statistical analysis of public addresses by these two leaders would show that George W. Bush in fact used the passive more and increasingly as his presidency continued. But also, and more importantly, it displays a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of passive voice in language. Passive voice has nothing to do with passivity in the sense of being weak-willed or subordinate in any kind of judgmental sense, but there is a certain amount of truth in the notion of agency or lack of agency that I'd like to explore. A voice is basically the means by which we maintain theme and rhyme in our utterances in a language, and theme and rhyme is a technical term for talking about how we manage, when we're speaking or writing, to keep already given or familiar information towards the start of what we're saying and provide newly given information towards the end. And there are sound cognitive reasons for this. It's easier to get kind of focused on listening for new and therefore really important to hear information if you have a bit of a run-up to it. And that's why it makes good sense from a cognitive perspective to leave new information until later in an utterance, so that the listener can basically get ready to hear it. And that's what theme and rhyme is. Theme is the given information that we normally place early in a sentence or early in an utterance, and rhyme is the newer stuff that we add in as we go along. Now, this is particularly important in English because, as I said in an earlier installment, we have so little morphology to help the listener navigate relationships. We have to rely much more on syntax, and syntax basically is the order in which you say stuff. Now, let's look at an example. A large dog bit a pensioner in the neck outside Tesco on Saturday while he was trying to stop it from attacking his grandchild. Now, this being a news story, more or less everything in it is new for the listener reader, but we have to start somewhere, and the writer here has chosen to start with a large dog. Now, a large dog here is a noun phrase, and it's occupying what we call subject position. That is the first kind of noun phrase position in the sentence. Now, the writer then goes on to introduce a verb, because we need a verb phrase as well to describe the action, in this case, bit. Now, it just so happens that the subject, a large dog, is also the person or thing that did the biting. Dog bites man. Okay? Now, this means our job grammatically is very simple. We can simply use active voice, which is just subject, verb in whatever tense would be appropriate, and object as we go along. And that's all active voice is. Active voice occurs where theme and rhyme, or given information and new information, can be accommodated within subject-verb-object, because the subject is also the doer of the verb, or in technical terms, the subject is also the agent of the verb. Now, if we go further into the news story, we could see sentences like this. The man was taken to a nearby hospital with severe bite wounds. The animal has been captured and put down. Now here we have the man and the animal, in each case in subject position, because they're already given from the first sentence in the story. But we're faced with a grammatical problem, because the man, though he's given and therefore we need him to be in subject position, is not the doer of the thing we now need to express. The man didn't take himself to a nearby hospital. He didn't present himself in that way. The animal didn't capture itself. The animal didn't put itself down. There are others involved, but we don't know about them yet. So we have a problem. We can either find some means to get them into subject position, or, as here, we employ passive voice to maintain the people we know about at the head of the sentence and go on to say what we need to say. So passive voice is when we can't maintain this given information first, newer information later order without changing the form of the verb, because the subject and the agent are not the same. Okay? We can't say the man took to a nearby hospital. We can't say the animal captured and put down. That doesn't work, because the man and the animal are not the agents of the verb. Therefore, we need the passive to allow us to maintain this syntactic order, which is a deep need, in English especially, but in other languages too. Now, that's really all that passive voice is there to do. It's a trick to allow us to maintain this easiest possible order of linguistic information in a sentence. But there are other ways of doing the same thing. For example, we could say somebody took the man to hospital instead of the man was taken. We could say someone captured the animal and put it down. We could even name those people. We could say local ambulance crew took the man to hospital. The police or the RSPCA captured the animal and put it down. But to do that, we'd have to introduce new information in a space in an utterance where the listener would be anticipating given or known information. And while we may get away with it, it may place a greater strain on the listener to deal with that new information more quickly than they anticipated. So it's something that we tend not to do, especially in writing. It's something that we may resort to in speech, because as you can see, adding somebody or someone at the head of a sentence is easier for the speaker than creating a passive structure, which is inherently grammatically more complex. However, the increase in ease for the speaker is counterbalanced by the increase in strain on the listener. And this is something that we manage in real time as we go through live. But as a general rule, our governing principle is the thing that I need to put in subject position, is the thing that's already given also the doer of the action I'm about to describe, or is it not? And that's fundamentally all that voice is about, and everything else that's said about disguising the doer, or we don't know who the doer is, or something like that, is really just an obscuring of the simpler and, in my view, more elegant grammatical reason for why we have active and passive voice. Now, coming to an end and connecting back to that point I made about cognitive strain, I have a question for you. are there limits to what grammar can do, or what can be done with and through grammar? I would argue there are, and that they are human limits. They're human cognition limits. And to illustrate what I mean, have a look at this utterance. He'll have been being interrogated for 6 days straight by the time we can get to him. Let's hope too much progress won't have been being made on breaking his resistance by then. Now, such utterances are possible. Indeed, I've just made them. But they're incredibly difficult to compose, let alone process. And ultimately, all decisions in terms of grammatical employment boil down to what is the speaker capable of producing under time conditions, and what is the listener-reader able to process with little or reasonable strain. And as soon as we overstep those boundaries, as I would suggest I have done here, it breaks down. I'd like to thank you very much for viewing these installments, and if you have any questions, you can get back to me at anthony@teachertrainingunplugged.com.